The frigid wind howled across the desolate Wyoming landscape like a vengeful spirit, carrying with it the promise of death to any soul unfortunate enough to be caught in its icy embrace. Weston Thompson pulled his sheepskin coat tighter around his broad shoulders, squinting against the blinding whiteness that had consumed the world around him. February 1878 was proving to be the harshest winter Wyoming had seen in decades, and as he urged his horse forward through knee-deep snow, he wondered if he'd made a grave mistake leaving the warmth of his cabin that morning. "Just a little farther, Maverick," Weston murmured to his chestnut gelding, whose breath came in great clouds of condensation. "We'll check the southern fence line, then head back before this storm gets any worse." At 26, Weston had spent nearly half his life working cattle across the frontier, building a modest spread just outside of Cody over the past 3 years. The solitary life suited him, or so he told himself, though the loneliness of winter had a way of seeping into a man's bones just as surely as the cold. The sudden jerk of Maverick's head nearly unseated him. The horse whinnied, ears perked forward toward a dark shape partially obscured by drifting snow about 50 yards ahead. "Whoa, boy, easy now." Weston steadied his mount, narrowing his eyes to make out what had disturbed the animal. At first he thought it might be a fallen tree branch or perhaps a wounded deer. It wasn't until he dismounted and trudged closer that the blood froze in his veins. A woman lay half buried in snow, her long black hair spilling across the white ground like spilled ink. Her skin was the color of burnished copper, though now it had taken on a frightening blue tinge. She wore buckskin clothing adorned with intricate beadwork distinctly Apache in design. Weston dropped to his knees beside her, brushing snow from her face with trembling hands. He'd heard rumors of a small band of Apache who had moved north, far from their traditional territories, fleeing the brutal campaigns of the U.S. Army. But to find one here, miles from any settlement in the dead of winter. "Miss, can you hear me?" His voice sounded strange in the muffled silence of the snowfall. To his astonishment, her eyelids fluttered. Dark eyes, nearly black as obsidian, gazed up at him with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. "Please." The word was barely a whisper, her cracked lips moving with painful effort. "I will be yours forever if you save me." Before Weston could respond, her eyes rolled back, and she slipped into unconsciousness. "Damn it all," he muttered, quickly removing his coat to wrap around her slight frame. She was ice cold to the touch, and he couldn't tell how long she'd been exposed to the elements. Every minute counted now. With careful movements, he lifted her onto Maverick's back before mounting behind her, cradling her limp body against his chest. The woman weighed almost nothing, which concerned him even more. He turned Maverick toward home, urging the horse to a pace as quick as the treacherous conditions would allow. "Hold on," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was speaking to the woman, his horse, or himself. "Just hold on." The journey back to his cabin seemed interminable, the wind growing fiercer with each passing minute. By the time the simple log structure came into view, Weston's fingers were numb with cold, and the woman had grown alarmingly still in his arms. Dismounting awkwardly while holding her, he kicked the cabin door open and carried her inside. The warmth hit him like a physical force after the punishing cold. Without ceremony, he laid her on his bed and worked quickly to build up the fire in the stone hearth. Only then, with flames crackling and throwing golden light across the cabin's interior, did Weston turn his full attention to his unexpected guest. The woman's breathing was shallow, her skin still frightfully cold. He knew enough about surviving Wyoming winters to recognize the signs of severe hypothermia. "This might be improper, miss," he said softly as he began to remove her wet clothing, but it's necessary if you're to see tomorrow." He worked efficiently, replacing her frozen garments with his own spare clothes, a flannel shirt and woolen trousers that swallowed her smaller frame. He wrapped her in every blanket he owned, placing heated stones wrapped in cloth near her core, careful not to burn her delicate skin. Throughout the night, Weston kept vigilant watch, refreshing the heated stones and spooning thin broth between her lips whenever she showed signs of consciousness. By dawn, her breathing had strengthened, and some color had returned to her cheeks. As morning light filtered through the cabin's single window, her eyes opened fully for the first time. She stared at him with guarded curiosity, then glanced around the unfamiliar surroundings with growing alarm. "You're safe," Weston said, keeping his voice gentle. "I found you in the snow." "My name is Weston Thompson. I have a small cattle ranch outside of Cody." She remained silent, watching him with those intense dark eyes. "You understand English?" he asked after a moment. "Yes." Her voice was surprisingly melodic, though raspy from disuse. "I am Bidziil Azee." She pronounced it Bidziil Azee with a softness to the syllables that made them sound like music. "Bidziil," he repeated, stumbling slightly over the unfamiliar name. "That's pretty." "What does it mean?" "Strength," she replied, a flicker of pride crossing her features. "My father named me for the strength he saw in me when I was born in a snowstorm much like this one." Weston nodded, finding the name fitting for a woman who had survived what should have been certain death. "Are you hungry? I've got stew." She hesitated before nodding once, her movements still careful and measured. As Weston moved about the cabin preparing a bowl of the venison stew he'd made the previous day, he felt her eyes following him. When he returned to her bedside and helped her sit up enough to eat, he finally asked the question that had been burning in his mind since finding her. "Bidziil, what were you doing out there alone in that storm?" Her hand trembled slightly as she accepted the spoon he offered. "I was not alone when the journey began." The implication hung heavy in the air between them. "My people," she continued, her voice faltering. "We were traveling north. Soldiers have been driving us from our lands for many seasons. We heard of others who found peace in these mountains." "Your family?" Weston asked gently. "My brother and I were the last of our family line. We traveled with 3 other families." She took a slow, deliberate breath. "The storm came suddenly. We became separated. I searched for 2 days before becoming lost myself." Weston's heart sank. The chances of anyone else surviving that blizzard were slim to none. "I'm sorry," he said simply. Bidziil met his gaze directly. "You saved my life. I remember what I said to you in the snow. Among my people, such a debt is sacred." "You don't owe me anything," Weston replied quickly, feeling his face grow warm. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said with quiet certainty. "Not anyone. Many white men would have left an Apache woman to die or worse." Her eyes lowered to her bowl. "You are different." Weston cleared his throat uncomfortably. "You should rest. When the weather clears, I can help you look for your people." Even as he made the offer, he knew it was likely futile. If her companions had been caught in the same storm, the Wyoming wilderness would have already claimed them. Still, he couldn't bring himself to extinguish what little hope might remain in her heart. Bidziil seemed to read his thoughts. "You believe they are already with the ancestors," she stated rather than asked. "I didn't say that." "You did not need to." She handed him the empty bowl. "But I would still like to search when I am stronger." "Of course," Weston agreed. "But for now, you need to recover." Over the next 3 days, the storm continued unabated, trapping them together in the small cabin. Weston found himself strangely comforted by Bidziil's presence. Though she spoke little at first, she observed everything with keen intelligence. By the 3rd day, Her strength had improved enough that she insisted on helping with small tasks around the cabin. "I am not accustomed to idleness," she explained when Weston protested her effort to prepare their evening meal. "In my tribe, everyone contributes. And in mine, guests aren't put to work," he countered, though he relented when he saw the determination in her eyes. They settled into an unexpected rhythm, sharing the confined space with growing ease. Bidziil proved to be not only resilient but resourceful, showing Weston techniques for preserving meat that would last longer than his usual methods. In turn, he taught her about caring for cattle and horses in the harsh northern climate. On the fourth morning, they awoke to silence. The howling wind had finally ceased. Weston opened the cabin door to find the world transformed into a glittering white expanse under a painfully bright blue sky. "We can start searching today," he said over breakfast. "If your people found shelter, there's a chance they survived." Bidziil nodded, her face betraying little emotion, though Weston had begun to recognize the subtle signs of her feelings, the slight tightening around her eyes that indicated worry, the barely perceptible lift at the corners of her mouth when something pleased her. They set out on horseback, Bidziil riding behind Weston on Maverick. She directed him toward where she had last seen her companions, her arms wrapped around his waist for balance. The physical contact was distracting in ways Weston hadn't anticipated, and he found himself increasingly aware of her presence, the subtle scent of herbs that clung to her hair, the strength in her slender arms. Their search that day yielded nothing but pristine snowfields and the occasional tracks of wildlife. As the sun began its descent, Weston reluctantly suggested they return to the cabin. "We'll try again tomorrow," he promised, "perhaps in a different direction." Bidziil said nothing on the ride back, her silence more profound than usual. It wasn't until they were inside, warming themselves by the fire, that she spoke. "They are gone," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. "I feel it in my heart." Weston wanted to offer comfort but knew that empty reassurances would be an insult to her intelligence. Instead, he asked, "Will you tell me about them? Your brother, your people." Something shifted in her expression, gratitude perhaps, for not dismissing her grief or trying to minimize it. For the next hour, she spoke more than she had in all the previous days combined, telling him about her younger brother, Niall, who was gifted with horses, about the elders who carried their people's stories, about traditions that had endured despite decades of persecution. "And now it falls to me to remember," she concluded, a single tear tracing down her cheek. "If I forget, they truly die." Without thinking, Weston reached out and took her hand. "You won't forget, and now I know them too in some small way." Bidziil looked down at their joined hands, then back to his face. "Thank you, Weston Thompson." The days that followed established a new pattern. They continued searching for any sign of her people, though with diminishing hope. Between these expeditions, Bidziil helped Weston with his daily chores. She proved to have a remarkable way with animals, especially Maverick, who would nuzzle her palm affectionately whenever she approached. "He is a good horse," she observed one evening as they finished tending to him. "He has a strong spirit. Takes one to know one," Weston replied with a small smile. Bidziil tilted her head, considering him. "You are different from other white men I have known." "Is that good or bad?" "Good," she said simply. "You see with your heart as well as your eyes." The compliment warmed him more than it should have. He was becoming increasingly aware of how much he enjoyed her company, how the cabin no longer felt empty with her presence filling its corners. 2 weeks after finding Bidziil in the snow, they made a grim discovery. While checking one of the more remote areas of Weston's property, they came upon evidence of a camp that had been overwhelmed by the blizzard. Personal effects frozen into the snow and ice told the story more clearly than words could have. Her people had sought shelter here, but the storm had been too fierce. Bidziil knelt in the snow, touching a beaded pouch that had belonged to her brother. Her face remained composed, but Weston could see the devastation in her eyes. "We should bury them properly," he said quietly. She looked up at him, surprised. "You would help me with our burial customs. Tell me what to do." Under Bidziil's direction, Weston helped recover what remains they could find, which had been mercifully preserved by the cold. They worked throughout the day, Bidziil singing soft, mournful songs in her native language as they created a burial cairn, according to Apache tradition. As the sun began to set, casting long purple shadows across the snow, Bidziil stood before the cairn and spoke words that Weston couldn't understand but felt in his heart nonetheless. When she had finished, she turned to him with eyes bright with unshed tears. "Now they can travel to the spirit world," she said. "You have honored them as if they were your own people." "They matter to you," Weston replied simply. "That makes them matter to me." The ride back to the cabin was silent, both lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the familiar structure, Bidziil finally spoke. "I have no people now, no home." Weston reined Maverick to a stop, turning in the saddle to look at her. "You have a home as long as you want one, with me." The words came out before he could consider their implications, but he found he meant them completely. The thought of Bidziil leaving created a hollow sensation in his chest that he hadn't expected. "Because of my promise in the snow?" she asked, her expression unreadable. "Because I said I would be yours forever." "No," Weston said firmly. "You were half frozen and desperate. I'd never hold you to words spoken in such circumstances. Stay because you want to, or go wherever your path leads you. The choice is yours." Bidziil studied his face for a long moment. "I would like to stay," she said finally. "For now." "For now," he agreed, ignoring the disproportionate relief her words brought him. As winter gradually released its grip on the land, Weston and Bidziil settled into a comfortable routine. He learned that she was 24 years old and had been taught English by a missionary who had lived near her people for several years. She was skilled in herbal medicine, a knowledge she put to use when one of Weston's calves fell ill. "How did you do that?" he asked in amazement after the calf recovered from what he had been certain was a fatal illness. Bidziil shrugged, though he could see she was pleased by his reaction. "My mother was a healer. She taught me to listen to what plants tell us about their power." "You could help a lot of people around here with skills like that," Weston observed. "Dr. Harrison only makes it to Cody once a month, and he charges more than most can afford." Something closed in Bidziil's expression. People here would not accept healing from an Apache woman. Weston wanted to argue but knew she was likely right. The prejudice against Native Americans ran deep, especially in frontier territories where conflicts were still fresh in memory. "Their loss," he said instead, "but I'm grateful for your knowledge." As March turned to April and the first green shoots began to emerge from the thawing earth, Weston found himself increasingly drawn to Bidziil in ways that went beyond appreciation for her practical skills or enjoyment of her company. He noticed the graceful line of her neck when she tilted her head in thought, the way sunlight caught in her hair, the subtle curve of her lips when something amused her. These thoughts troubled him. Bidziil was dependent on him for shelter and safety in a land that would be hostile to her. Any expression of deeper feelings would be an abuse of that position, regardless of how genuine those feelings might be. So Weston kept his growing attraction carefully contained, maintaining a respectful distance even as they lived in close quarters. If Bidziil noticed his occasional awkwardness or the way his gaze sometimes lingered on her longer than necessary, she gave no indication, until the night of the spring equinox. My people celebrate this night, Bidziil told him as they finished their evening meal. It marks the balance between darkness and light, a time when new beginnings are possible. How do you celebrate? Weston asked, curious as always about her customs, with dancing, stories, special foods. A wistful expression crossed her face, and by giving thanks for surviving another winter. Weston considered for a moment, then stood and extended his hand to her. I can't provide all that, but perhaps we could acknowledge the occasion in some small way. Bidziil looked at his outstretched hand, then back to his face. What do you suggest? A dance? He offered, suddenly feeling foolish. Though I should warn you, I'm not particularly skilled. To his surprise, a genuine smile bloomed on her face, the first he'd seen since finding her. I would like that, she said, placing her hand in his. Weston helped her to her feet, acutely aware of how perfectly her smaller hand fit within his own. Without music, he began a simple box step, the kind he'd learned at community gatherings back in his youth. Bidziil followed his lead with natural grace, quickly adapting to the unfamiliar dance. As they moved together in the firelit cabin, something shifted between them, a subtle change in the air, in the way they looked at each other. In my tribe, Bidziil said softly as they turned, we believe that souls can recognize each other, even when meeting for the first time. Weston's heart quickened. What do you mean? Some souls have journeyed together before in other lives. Her dark eyes held his. When they find each other again, there is a recognition. And do you believe that's true for us? The question felt dangerous, crossing a line he'd carefully maintained. Instead of answering directly, Bidziil guided his hand to rest over her heart. Through the thin fabric of her shirt, one of his that she had altered to fit her smaller frame, he could feel the steady, quickening beat. My heart knows yours, she said simply. Weston stood perfectly still, afraid that any movement might break whatever spell had fallen over them. Bidziil, he began, uncertain what he wanted to say. She reached up, her fingers lightly tracing the line of his jaw. You fear taking advantage of my situation, of my gratitude. Her perceptiveness shouldn't have surprised him by now, but it did. Yes, he admitted. You're alone here, dependent on my hospitality. I am capable of making my own choices, Weston Thompson, she replied, a hint of steel beneath her gentle tone. And I choose to stay, not from obligation or lack of options, but because I wish to be here. With you. The simple declaration undid him. With careful restraint, Weston leaned down, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Instead, Bidziil rose on her toes to meet him, their lips coming together in a kiss that felt both inevitable and surprising in its intensity. When they parted, Weston rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as he absorbed the magnitude of what had just happened. I never expected to find you, he whispered. No, she agreed, her hands resting against his chest. But you did find me. Perhaps that is what matters. Their relationship deepened with the coming of spring. Weston discovered in Bidziil a partner, unlike any he could have imagined, intelligent, resilient, and possessed of a quiet wisdom that continually surprised him. She approached life on the frontier with a practical adaptability that complemented his own stubborn determination. Yet he was not blind to the challenges they would face. The first test came in early May when supplies ran low and a trip into Cody became necessary. I'll come with you, Bidziil stated as he prepared the wagon. Weston hesitated. Bidziil, the people in town, they might not be welcoming. I am aware of how your people view mine, she replied evenly, but I cannot remain hidden forever if this is to be my home. Her logic was irrefutable, though it did nothing to ease his concern. Still, he recognized that this was her decision to make. All right, he agreed, but stay close to me." The 7-mile journey into town passed pleasantly enough, with spring having transformed the landscape into a vibrant palette of greens and wildflowers. As they approached the outskirts of Cody, however, Weston felt Bidziil tense beside him. Cody in 1878 was still a small settlement, though growing steadily due to its proximity to the newly established Yellowstone National Park. The main street consisted of a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, and various other businesses catering to both locals and the occasional tourists venturing west to see the natural wonders. As Weston guided the wagon down the dusty main street, he was acutely aware of the stares they attracted. Conversations halted mid-sentence. People stepped off boardwalks to get a better look. "Keep your head high," he murmured to Bidziil. "You've done nothing to be ashamed of." She gave him a sidelong glance that was almost amused. "I have never been ashamed of who I am, Weston." He smiled at that, admiring her fortitude even as anxiety churned in his stomach. They pulled up in front of Jennings' general store, and Weston helped Bidziil down from the wagon, conscious of the eyes following their every movement. Inside the store, the usual friendly greeting from Edgar Jennings was notably absent. The storekeeper, a portly man in his 50s with whom Weston had always maintained cordial relations, regarded them with undisguised suspicion. "Thompson," he acknowledged curtly. "What can I help you with today?" Weston handed over his list of supplies, keeping his manner deliberately casual. "Just the usual, Edgar, and some fabric, if you've got any suitable for women's clothing." Jennings' eyes flicked to Bidziil, who stood examining a display of sewing notions with apparent interest, though Weston knew she was acutely aware of the tension in the room. "Didn't know you'd taken up with an Indian," Jennings said, lowering his voice as if Bidziil couldn't hear him from mere feet away. "Miss Azee is my guest," Weston replied evenly, "and deserving of the same respect you'd show any lady." The storekeeper snorted. "Lady, that's rich." Nevertheless, he began gathering the requested items, adding, "Your business is your business, Thompson, but folks around here might not take kindly to this arrangement." Before Weston could respond, the store's door opened, admitting Sheriff Bill Harlan. The lawman paused, taking in the scene with shrewd eyes. "Weston," he greeted, approaching with measured steps. "Been a while since you've been in town." "Sheriff," Weston nodded, "just picking up supplies." Harlan's gaze settled on Bidziil. "And who might this be?" "This is Miss Bidziil Azee," Weston said, moving to stand beside her. "Bidziil, this is Sheriff Harlan." To her credit, Bidziil met the lawman's stare directly. "Sheriff," she acknowledged with a slight inclination of her head. Harlan studied her for an uncomfortable moment. "Apache, if I'm not mistaken." "Yes," she replied simply. "Long way from home, aren't you?" The question carried an implicit challenge. "She's making her home with me now," Weston interjected, his tone making it clear the matter wasn't up for discussion. A heavy silence filled the store. Finally, Harlan shrugged. "As long as there's no trouble, it's no concern of mine who folks associate with." He turned back to Weston, adding in a lower voice, "But not everyone's as open-minded, Thompson. You do well to remember that." With that warning delivered, the sheriff tipped his hat and left, leaving an atmosphere thick with unspoken tension. They completed their purchases in strained silence. As they loaded the supplies into their wagon, Bidziil finally spoke. "That went better than I expected," she remarked dryly. Weston looked at her in surprise, then chuckled despite himself. "Your standards must be awfully low." "I am alive, and no one tried to shoot me or hang me," she pointed out. "By my experience with white settlements, that qualifies as a warm welcome." The matter-of-fact way she stated this sobering truth made Weston's heart ache. "It shouldn't be that way," he said quietly. No, she agreed, but acknowledging what is does not mean accepting that it must always be so. She touched his arm gently. Change begins with individual hearts, like yours. As they prepared to depart, a commotion further down the street caught their attention. A group of men had emerged from the saloon, their loud voices carrying clearly in the afternoon air. One of them, a ranch hand Weston recognized as working for the Bailey outfit north of town, spotted them and nudged his companions. "Look at that, boys," he called, swaggering toward them. "Thompson's got himself an Indian squaw." Weston stiffened, his hand moving instinctively to the revolver at his hip. "Get in the wagon, Bidziil," he said quietly. "Running away with your pet savage Thompson." Another man jeered. "Didn't figure you for an Indian lover." "That's enough, Collins," Weston warned, his voice dangerously calm. "Miss Azee is a lady and will be treated as such." The men laughed, emboldened by alcohol and the growing crowd of onlookers. "Lady? She's nothing but an Apache whore. Her people been killing white settlers for years." Weston stepped forward, rage building in his chest, but Bidziil's hand on his arm stopped him. "They are not worth it," she said softly. "Their words cannot touch me." Her dignity in the face of such ugliness only intensified his anger, but he recognized the wisdom in avoiding a confrontation that could only end badly. With a curt nod, he helped her into the wagon and climbed up beside her. As they pulled away, one of the men threw a rock that struck the side of the wagon with a dull thud. Weston's knuckles whitened on the reins, but he kept his gaze forward, refusing to give them the satisfaction of a response. They were nearly at the edge of town when a woman's voice called out, halting their progress. "Mr. Thompson, wait please." Weston turned to see Sarah Miller, the town's schoolteacher, hurrying toward them. In her mid-30s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, Miss Miller was one of the few people in Cody that Weston genuinely respected. "Miss Miller," he acknowledged, reining the horses to a stop. She approached the wagon, slightly breathless from her rush. "I wanted to apologize for the disgraceful behavior you encountered today," she said, her gaze including Bidziil in the statement. "Such ignorance is a poor reflection of our community." Bidziil regarded the woman with cautious interest. "You are not troubled by my presence here." "My dear," Miss Miller replied with a small smile, "I've spent most of my life being told what should trouble me, usually by men who consider themselves my betters. I've learned to make up my own mind." She extended her hand. "Sarah Miller, I teach at the school." After a moment's hesitation, Bidziil took the offered hand. "Bidziil Azee." "A beautiful name," Miss Miller said. "If you're staying in the area, perhaps you might visit me sometime. I would value the opportunity to learn about your culture, and I have books you might enjoy." The unexpected kindness seemed to catch Bidziil off guard. "I would like that." "Excellent." Miss Miller turned to Weston. "And don't worry about those fools back there. Sheriff Harlan will settle them down, and most folks around here are decent enough once they get past their initial surprise." "I appreciate that, Miss Miller," Weston said sincerely. "And your kindness." As they continued their journey home, the tension gradually eased from Bidziil's shoulders. "She was not what I expected," she admitted. "Sarah Miller's one of a kind," Weston agreed. "Been teaching here since before I arrived. Stands up to the town council regularly when they try to interfere with her methods." "You admire her," Bidziil observed. "I do. She sees people as they are, not as labels or categories." Bidziil was quiet for a moment, then said, "Perhaps there can be a place for me here after all." "There already is," Weston assured her, reaching over to take her hand. "Right beside me." The incident in town, while unpleasant, proved to be a turning point. Rather than intimidating Bidziil into seclusion, It seemed to strengthen her resolve to carve out a place for herself in this new life. In the weeks that followed, she accompanied Weston on subsequent trips to Cody, facing the mixture of curiosity, hostility, and occasional kindness with unwavering dignity. Sarah Miller proved to be a true friend, inviting Bidziil to her small house behind the schoolhouse for tea and conversation. Through these visits, Bidziil gained access to books and knowledge about the changing world beyond their immediate surroundings. "She has offered to teach me to read better," Bidziil told Weston one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I learned some basics from the missionary, but there is much more to learn." "That's wonderful," Weston replied, genuinely pleased. "Sarah's a fine teacher." Bidziil hesitated, then added, "She also suggested I might share some of my knowledge of herbal medicine. She believes it could help bridge understanding between cultures." Weston considered this. "It's not a bad idea if you're comfortable with it. People tend to be more accepting when they can see practical value in something unfamiliar." "I would start slowly," Bidziil said. "Perhaps with remedies for common ailments that do not conflict with your people's medicine." "Our people," Weston corrected gently. "You're part of this community now, whether everyone accepts that yet or not." She smiled at him, the expression transforming her serious face. "Our people, then." As spring blossomed fully into summer, their relationship deepened beyond what Weston had thought possible. Bidziil brought a perspective to his life that challenged and enriched him, seeing the world through eyes unclouded by the prejudices and assumptions he had grown up with. In turn, he offered her stability and protection in a world that had taken everything else from her. They were harvesting vegetables from the small garden Bidziil had planted behind the cabin when Weston finally found the courage to ask the question that had been on his mind for weeks. "Bidziil," he began, setting down his basket of tomatoes, "I've been thinking." She looked up from where she was carefully selecting beans, a strand of hair falling across her face. "A dangerous pastime," she teased, having picked up the expression from him. "Very funny," he replied with a smile that quickly turned serious. "What I'm trying to say is, I love you. I think I have since that first night when you opened your eyes and looked at me like you could see straight through to my soul." Bidziil straightened, her expression softening. "I know," she said simply. "You know," he repeated, momentarily thrown off his carefully prepared speech. "Yes." A hint of amusement flickered in her eyes. "You are not as mysterious as you might think, Weston Thompson." "Well, that's humbling," he muttered, then took a deep breath. "What you might not know is that I want to marry you, properly, legally, in front of whoever will stand witness to it." The amusement faded from her face, replaced by something more complex. "You understand what that would mean, the difficulties we would face." "I do," he said firmly. "And I don't care. I love you, and I want to build a life with you, a family, if that's what you want too. The rest of the world can think what it likes." Bidziil was silent for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face. "When I made that promise in the snow," she finally said, "I was desperate, willing to say anything to survive. But now—" She stepped closer to him, taking his hands in hers. "Now I make the same promise with a clear mind and full heart. I will be yours forever, Weston Thompson, if you will be mine." Relief and joy flooded through him. "Is that a yes?" "Yes," she confirmed, her smile radiant. "It is yes in every language I know." Weston lifted her off her feet, spinning her in a circle that sent her laughing. When he set her down, he kissed her with all the passion and tenderness that had built within him over their months together. "Who will marry us?" Bidziil asked when they finally parted. "I doubt the preacher in Cody would be willing." "Actually," Weston replied, "I have an idea about that." 2 weeks later, under a perfect blue Wyoming sky, Weston and Bidziil stood hand in hand before a small gathering of people. Sarah Miller was there, of course, along with Sheriff Harlan, who had gradually come to respect their relationship. Edgar Jennings from the general store had surprised them by accepting their invitation, bringing his wife, who had expressed curiosity about the Apache woman who had captivated stoic Weston Thompson. Most unexpected was the presence of Judge William Carvel, who had ridden from Cheyenne specifically to perform the ceremony. A progressive-minded man known for his fair treatment of Native Americans in his courtroom, Judge Carvel had responded to Weston's letter with enthusiasm. "Marriage is a sacred bond," the judge now proclaimed, his voice carrying across the small assembly, recognized by law and custom across civilizations. "Today, we witness the union of two individuals who have found in each other qualities worthy of lifelong commitment." Bidziil wore a dress she and Sarah had created together, combining traditional Apache designs with contemporary styles. Around her neck hung a necklace of turquoise and silver that had belonged to her mother, the one possession she had managed to keep with her through her ordeal. Weston could barely concentrate on the judge's words, so entranced was he by the woman beside him. When the time came to speak their vows, his voice was steady with conviction. "I, Weston James Thompson, take you, Bidziil Azee, as my lawful wedded wife. I promise to stand beside you through all seasons, to honor your traditions as my own, to protect and cherish you until my final breath." Bidziil's eyes shimmered with emotion as she responded. "I, Bidziil Azee, take you, Weston James Thompson, as my husband. I promise to walk with you as your equal partner, to bring harmony to our home, to love you with a heart that recognized yours from the beginning." Judge Carvel pronounced them husband and wife with evident satisfaction, adding, "By the authority vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I declare this union legal and binding. What these two have joined together, let no prejudice or ignorance tear asunder." The small group of witnesses applauded, Sarah Miller wiping away tears of happiness. Even Sheriff Harlan looked moved by the ceremony's simple dignity. As Weston kissed his new wife, he felt a profound sense of rightness settle over him. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Those challenges were not long in coming. News of their marriage spread quickly throughout the region, eliciting reactions that ranged from cautious support to outright hostility. Several ranchers who had previously done business with Weston now refused to deal with him, forcing him to seek new arrangements for selling his cattle. More disturbing were the anonymous threats notes left at their property line, muttered warnings when Bidziil ventured into town. Sheriff Harlan took these seriously, increasing his patrols near their ranch and making it clear that violence would not be tolerated. "It will pass," Sarah assured them during one of her frequent visits. "People fear what they don't understand, but fear can't sustain itself indefinitely. They'll grow tired of hating when they see it changes nothing." Bidziil faced these difficulties with the same quiet strength she brought to everything. "My people have endured worse," she told Weston when he expressed concern for her safety. "And I have something they never had, a husband who stands as my shield and my equal." Despite the external pressures, their life together flourished. Bidziil's knowledge of plants and natural medicines gradually earned her a reputation among some of Cody's residents. It began with Mrs. Jennings, who suffered from debilitating headaches that conventional remedies couldn't touch. In desperation, she sought out Bidziil, who prepared a tincture that provided immediate relief. Word spread cautiously at first, then with increasing confidence. Women would appear at their door, often looking nervously over their shoulders, seeking help for ailments they hadn't been able to address elsewhere. Bidziil treated each one with respect and discretion, never turning anyone away regardless of how they might have treated her in town. By the fall of 1878, a subtle shift had occurred in the community's attitude. While outright acceptance was still rare, the open hostility had largely subsided, replaced by a grudging acknowledgement of Bidziil's place in their midst. "You're changing minds," Weston observed one evening as they sat by the fire, Bidziil grinding herbs for a remedy she'd promised to Mrs. Bailey for her rheumatism. "One headache and fever at a time." "Perhaps," she replied with a small smile. "Or perhaps they are simply learning what you already knew, that people are more than the labels others assign to them." Winter returned to Wyoming with its customary severity, but this time it brought a different kind of change to their household. As December's first heavy snow blanketed the land, Bidziil shared news that left Weston speechless with joy. "A child grows within me," she told him, guiding his hand to rest on her still flat stomach. "Our child." Weston dropped to his knees before her, pressing his forehead against the place where their baby developed. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes," she confirmed. "The signs are clear and I feel the change in my body. By summer's arrival, we will be 3 instead of 2. The prospect of fatherhood filled Weston with equal parts elation and terror. His own father had been a harsh, distant man, providing materially for his family but little else. Weston had sworn to himself long ago that he would be different if ever blessed with children. "I don't know if I'll be any good at this," he admitted that night as they lay together in their bed. Bidziil traced the worry lines on his forehead with gentle fingers. "You will learn, as I will. The child will teach us what we need to know." Her confidence steadied him, as it so often did. Throughout the winter months, he watched with wonder as her body changed, the curve of her belly becoming more pronounced as their child grew within her. They spent long evenings discussing names, blending their cultural traditions as they had in so many other aspects of their life together. Spring's arrival brought renewed energy to their preparations. Weston built a cradle from pine he had harvested and seasoned himself, carving intricate designs under Bidziil's guidance. She, in turn, created soft blankets and tiny garments, singing traditional Apache songs to the child as she worked. Sarah Miller organized what she called a welcoming circle, her adaptation of the traditional baby shower to honor both Western and Apache customs. To Weston and Bidziil's surprise, nearly a dozen women from Cody attended, bringing gifts and advice for the expectant mother. "They're curious about you," Sarah explained to Bidziil. "And more importantly, they're starting to see you as a woman like themselves, with the same hopes and concerns they have." The birth itself came in early July, on a night when the sky was alive with stars. Bidziil, who had insisted on traditional Apache birthing methods supported by Sarah's more conventional knowledge, labored with the same quiet strength she brought to everything. Weston paced outside their bedroom, alternately praying to his God and to any spirits Bidziil might believe in, promising anything if only she and the baby would be safe. When Sarah finally emerged, her face tired but radiant, he nearly collapsed with relief. "You have a son," she told him. "A strong, healthy boy, and Bidziil is doing well." Inside the bedroom, Weston found his wife propped against pillows, her face glowing with exhaustion and triumph as she cradled a small bundle against her breast. She looked up as he entered, and the love in her eyes nearly brought him to his knees. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Weston approached with reverent steps, gazing down at the tiny face that somehow combined features from both of them, Bidziil's high cheekbones and copper skin, his own cleft chin, and the suggestion of what might become his nose. "He's perfect," Weston whispered, gently touching the downy black hair that covered the baby's head. "We will call him Nilchai Thompson," Bidziil said. "Nilchai means wind in my language, born free and unable to be contained." "Nilchai," Weston repeated, testing the name on his tongue. "It suits him." As he sat beside them on the bed, one arm around Bidziil's shoulders and the other supporting their son's tiny body, Weston was overwhelmed by the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a desperate encounter in a snowstorm to the creation of a family that bridged two worlds, their path had been neither easy nor expected. "I never thought I could be this happy," he admitted, pressing a kiss to Bidziil's temple. "Nor I," she replied. "When I lost my people, I believed I had lost everything. I did not understand that life could begin again in new forms." "Do you ever regret it?" he asked, the question that occasionally still troubled him. "Staying with me, building a life so different from what you knew before?" Bidziil considered the question with her usual thoughtfulness. "I honor what was lost," she finally said. "I keep the memories of my people alive, and I will pass their stories to our son, but regret? No." She looked down at their child, then back to Weston. "With you, I found not just survival but a reason to live. You gave me a future when mine had been stolen away." "You gave me just as much," Weston insisted. "Before you, I existed. Now I truly live." Young Nilchai Thompson grew into a remarkable child, embodying the best qualities of both his parents. By age 5, he was fluent in both English and Apache, moving effortlessly between the cultural traditions Bidziil and Weston maintained in their home. His natural charm and intelligence made him a favorite in Cody, where attitudes had continued to evolve over the years. The Thompson Ranch prospered under Weston and Bidziil's joint stewardship. They expanded their holdings, incorporating sustainable practices drawn from Apache traditions that proved remarkably effective in the sometimes harsh Wyoming environment. Their success attracted attention beyond the local community, with agricultural journals occasionally featuring their innovative methods. In 1885, they welcomed a daughter they named Emma Sarah Thompson, honoring both Weston's maternal grandmother and their dear friend Miss Miller, who by then had become almost a member of their family. Emma inherited Bidziil's gift with plants and animals, following her mother around from an early age, soaking up knowledge like the fertile soil absorbed rain. By 1890, Cody had grown significantly, spurred by the continued development of Yellowstone National Park and the expansion of the railroad. The town that had once regarded Bidziil with suspicion now counted her among its most respected citizens. Her healing practice had evolved into a formal arrangement with Dr. Harrison's successor, combining traditional medicine with Apache remedies to the benefit of all their patients. On a warm autumn evening in 1898, 20 years after Weston had found Bidziil in the snow, they sat together on the porch of their expanded home. Nilchai, now a young man of 20, was attending university in Denver, something that would have been unimaginable for a half-Apache child when he was born. Emma, 13 and precocious, was inside practicing the piano that Weston had surprised the family with the previous Christmas. "Do you remember what you said to me that day?" Weston asked, his hair now streaked with silver though his eyes remained as keen as ever. "In the snow." "I said many things that day," Bidziil replied with a small smile, her own beauty matured but undiminished by time, most of them delirious. "You said you would be mine forever if I saved you," he reminded her, taking her hand in his. "As if I needed any incentive beyond basic human decency." "And yet I kept my promise," she said softly. "So you did." Weston raised her hand to his lips. "Though I think I got the better end of that bargain." Bidziil's laugh, still rare enough to be treasured, floated on the evening air. Perhaps we both did. Inside, Emma transitioned from her practice piece to a song Bidziil had taught her, an Apache melody adapted for the piano. The notes drifted through the open window, a perfect blending of traditions that mirrored the life they had built together. "I used to wonder if you resented it sometimes," Weston admitted. "The promise made in desperation that shaped your entire future." Bidziil turned to face him fully, her dark eyes serious. "I have had 20 years to leave if that were the case," she pointed out reasonably. "I stay because every day I choose this life again, because every day I fall in love with you anew, even when I'm stubborn. Or when my knees creak like old floorboards. Especially then," she assured him, her expression tender. "The man I fell in love with is still here, just with more wisdom in his eyes and more stories etched on his face." As twilight deepened around them, Weston reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them together. A blizzard, a desperate promise, courage on both their parts to defy convention and forge a path where none had existed before. What had begun as a rescue had transformed into something far more profound, a partnership that had not only survived against considerable odds, but had thrived, changing both of them and the community around them in the process. "You ever think about how different our lives might have been?" he asked. "If I hadn't ridden out to check that fence line on that particular day, the spirits guided you," Bidziil said with the certainty that was so much a part of her character. "Just as they guided me to survive until you found me. Some paths are meant to cross, Weston. Ours was such a path." He couldn't argue with her logic, had never been able to when she spoke with that quiet conviction. Instead, he simply held her hand more tightly, grateful beyond words for the woman who had transformed a simple act of kindness into a lifetime of love. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Nilchai's horse came trotting down the long drive to their ranch, an unexpected but welcome surprise. Their son had written that he might visit during the university's brief autumn break, but they hadn't expected him so soon. "Mother, father," he called out as he approached, his voice carrying the same deep timbre as Weston's. "I brought someone I want you to meet." Behind him rode a young woman with honey-colored hair and a face alight with nervous anticipation. Nilchai helped her dismount with the gentle courtesy his parents had instilled in him, then led her toward the porch with evident pride. "This is Catherine Dawson," he introduced. "Her father teaches history at the university." Turning to the young woman, he added, "Kate, these are my parents, Weston and Bidziil Thompson." As introductions were made and Emma burst from the house to greet her beloved brother, Weston exchanged a knowing glance with Bidziil. They recognized the look in their son's eyes, the same one they had shared across countless moments throughout their years together. Later that night, with their unexpected guests settled and the house quiet once more, Weston held Bidziil close in their bed, breathing in the familiar scent of sage and sweetgrass that always clung to her hair. "Our son is in love," he murmured against her temple. "Yes," she agreed. "And she seems worthy of him." "They'll face challenges," Weston said, thinking of the prejudices that, while diminished, had not disappeared entirely from the world. "They will," Bidziil acknowledged, "but they will face them with the strength that comes from knowing it can be done. We have shown them that." In that simple statement lay perhaps their greatest accomplishment, not just surviving against the odds, not just building a successful life together, but creating a legacy of possibility for those who would come after them. The path they had forged through love and determination would make the way easier for Nilchai and Catherine, and for countless others who dared to follow their hearts across the boundaries society constructed. "I love you," Weston said, the words no less meaningful for having been spoken thousands of times over their years together. "Forever." Bidziil smiled in the darkness, completing the ritual they had established long ago. "I love you," she replied, "beyond forever." And as they drifted toward sleep in each other's arms, the promise made in desperate hope on a snow-covered Wyoming plain continued to fulfill itself in ways neither could have imagined on that fateful winter day, not just in their lifetime together, but in the futures they had made possible through the simple, revolutionary act of loving each other across every barrier placed before them.